This is GD Reads. I hope everybody's having a great day. Put on some headphones, relax, and enjoy. About 6 months ago, I started a newspaper route. I got laid off from my high-paying job as a diesel technician. In South Louisiana, it's difficult to find work close to home, so I took this job to keep the bills paid until I could get back on my feet. My route is an overnighter route, usually cold and very dark, far from the lights of towns. I use my own car for this. It usually starts around 11 p.m. and sometimes doesn't end until 8:30 a.m. I start out by kissing my wife, warming up my vehicle, while I eat a quick snack before heading out to meet the van that gives us our bundles of paper we have to roll and deliver. I usually meet up with some other delivery drivers at the local gas station on the edge of town to get some cheap drinks for the road. We roll our newspapers, so all I have to do on the road is toss them or put them in the mailboxes that some people have. My route starts out on the edge of town. It weaves in and out of rural neighborhoods, and then it takes me through some pretty dark and off-beaten path areas. A lot of swamps and such back there, and nothing but dark woods and the occasional house I have to deliver to. About 3 weeks ago is when it all began. I had a friend of mine come along the route to hang out for the night. His name is Eric. It started off as usual at the gas station where we met up, and the clerk let him leave his car there since we knew her so well. After rolling all the newspapers, we grabbed some coffee and hit the road. The first 2 hours went smoothly as we drove through the darkness. Then we started talking about ghosts, and he decided to share some creepy stories of his own that he swore were true. We all know how that goes. We ended up on a stretch of desolate highway. Highway 10 to be exact. Very dark, but a good road compared to what I drive on most of the time. I remember me and him both had fallen into the lull of conversation and the radio was turned off. There was no noise except for the wind from driving with the window down while we smoked our cigarettes. We turned off on one of the local back roads outside of a small town called Pitkin. As we turned down the road, we saw this faint glow in the distance, almost like a small fire. We thought it was strange for someone to have a bonfire at such a late hour, especially out here where most of the locals are farmers and get up early around 5 a.m. We kind of shrugged it off. As we got closer, we noticed the intensity was growing and was flashing erratically, almost like someone was turning the fire on and off. We eventually pulled over. We couldn't see the source of the glowing light or fire, whichever it may be. We got the overwhelming urge to leave and run, but we ignored it and we waited and watched. It was still and quiet out, completely quiet. Strange, as if we should be able to hear the cracking of a fire or the hiss of a gas line. We actually got to the point where the fear was just too much, and we called 911 as we drove away. I remember describing the scene to the dispatcher, and she asked if we had been taking any drugs or were on medication. It was such an unnatural scene. They sent deputies after we left and called us back to get an exact location of where the potential fire was, but when I told them, they reported no fire. The rest of the night went on as usual as me and Eric went over and over trying to wrap our minds around what we had seen, or the lack thereof. After the route was done, I dropped Eric off and went home. The next night as I was driving, I came across the same location. This time, all was normal. About 20 minutes later, I turned down the road that goes around the lake that was used as a hazardous material dumping site in the 60s and 70s from Fort Polk, the army base just up the road. Trees lined the road so closely that my mirror would occasionally get smacked with a branch. I had my window down while finishing my cigarette and could make out a strange noise coming from beyond the trees, almost as if someone was running as fast as my car was going, roughly 25 miles an hour. It lasted for almost 2 miles before I stopped and listened. As I slowed down the pace of whoever was out there did too. After I stopped, I heard it a few more times. It sounded like a massive tree snapped. After about 30 seconds, I took off driving as fast as I could down that skinny dirt road. I have driven this road many times and have never heard that before. Oh well. The following night, I was back in the area and decided to drive a little faster than normal earlier that night so I would have some time to stop and investigate the area those noises were coming from. He said he wanted to tag along after I told him about the noises so he could try to hear them too. Also to make sure I wasn't just hearing things. As we crept down the road slowly, I could barely make out the crunching sounds of leaves. There it is again. I said to Eric, who was preoccupied reading about the latest weather updates since a storm was approaching out of the west. He quickly turned off his phone. That was all but blinding him. He had it set so bright. "Listen," I said. "You can hear whatever is out there moving." I wasn't sure if it was the creature or whatever from the night before, so I decided to drive and see if it ran with my car again. As I took off, you could hear something paralleling against the car about 30 feet off into the woods, out of sight in the darkness. Eric heard it too. "Holy crap! What is that?" he said rather loudly. We were moving around 30 miles an hour, as Eric said. "What in the world could possibly move like that? That fast, especially through the woods?" "I don't know," I said, "and I'm not sure I want to know." So the next night I paid my friend Aaron to do the route for me. He was my substitute driver in case I was sick or just wanted a night off. Around 10 p.m. I picked Eric up at his house and went to the gas station we always met at and discussed going out to the spot where all these things had been happening. He agreed and we hit the road. We wanted to start our excursion where it all began, with the flashing light or possible fire. So we headed there first. Upon arrival, we found a little pull-off next to the wood line and parked, checked our flashlights and chugged the last bit of our sodas and got out. There was no fence or signs of any sort, so we figured we shouldn't get in any trouble since it was more than likely public land. As we entered, we didn't notice any strange feelings as we tried to remember exactly where the light source had originated from that night. About 150 feet or so in, we both got an uneasy shudder up our spines, like something was watching us. Not like an animal watching us, but more like a predator. That feeling you get when something startles you and your adrenaline skyrockets. As we continued, we had guessed we were near where the flashing orange glow emitted from. We looked and finally made something out through the darkness. It was some type of structure just randomly in the woods, like a house or an old barn. It was hard to tell, so we decided to go towards it. With our flashlights in hand, we began walking quietly just in case it was someone's house so we could turn around and leave without scaring somebody half to death. As we got closer, we could smell burned wood, almost like birch wood burning when doing pyrography. We could start to make out a backyard behind the place with a chain link fence that had serious sections missing and vines all over it. The building turned out to be an abandoned farm home with doors and windows missing. I could almost sense Eric was ready to leave, so I simply gave him two choices. Walk back to the car alone in the dark woods or stay with me and go inside, I said. He reluctantly agreed and we walked to the base of the porch. I kept hearing creaking and popping, but just brushed it off as a slight breeze making the old rickety house sway. Upon entering the house, we noticed it was strangely colder inside rather than out in the open night air of the woods. As we explored the first floor, we noticed some odd stuff, but nothing too unusual. Like the old couch had cushions that were covered in dust and pine straw like almost everything else, and the stairs looked like someone crawled on all fours, wiping their hands frantically while going up and down them. I said. "Looks like someone or some animal lives in here." Eric replied, "Yeah, or something." I could tell we were both having second thoughts about this. After mulling it over, we decided to check the basement out. We thought it was odd that this house had a basement, because homes in this area didn't have basements because of all the underground water deposits. We both hoped the wooden stairs going down would support us. There was a foul smell to this cellar-type basement, old and moldy. Shining our lights around, we realized it was pretty bare in there. I went to reach into my back pocket to grab my phone and check the time, and when I did, my hand hit something kinda hard, cold, and damp. I figured I hit a support beam, but when I turned, there wasn't one, and the wall was still a good 3 feet away from me. There was nothing there. I figured I had just imagined it, so we decided to leave. As we made our way up the stairs, we both heard what sounded like a screech coming from up above. We both stopped. "I don't think so," I said. As we sat there and listened, we began to hear footsteps coming from above us. Eric made a quiet coughing sound to clear his throat, and as he did, whatever was moving above stopped. Then suddenly, in rapid succession, you could hear several quick booms like something took off running, and then hissing or almost wheezing sound from the window above the basement entrance. Like whatever it was looking out to find where the noise came from. As we waited, and at this point trembling from fear and adrenaline, we heard the thuds go toward the front door area, and then leaves crunching. And all of a sudden, there was a burning smell. But this time, the smell was awful. The best way for me to describe it would be like a burned hamburger that was being blasted with a pro-gas torch. Now petrified, we forced ourselves to creep ever so slowly towards the door. It looked like someone had lit a large fire in the front yard area of the house. There were some large pieces of meat tied to sticks, presumably getting ready to hang over the fire. We snuck out and hid several feet away behind a tree. We saw it, and by it, I cannot describe perfectly what we were seeing. It was a naked man, but something wasn't right. He had no hair, and it appeared as if his elbows and knees were backwards. The glow of the fire bouncing off his skin showed a smooth, shiny texture. As we watched, we figured this was some deranged person who was squatting and decided to make an exit plan. We began to walk slowly towards where we had come from, so this nutcase wouldn't notice us. And of course, I somehow stepped on the driest and loudest cracking stick in the forest. We stopped immediately and turned to see that the man was gone, nowhere in sight. We figured he had went back into the house. As we turned to keep walking there, he was about 10 feet in front of us. We quickly realized he wasn't a he at all, but an it. The face was ghastly, no eyes, only deep sockets that seemed to lead into a black void. It looked as if something had sliced off its nose, and no lips, exposed only 6 teeth, 3 on top, 3 on bottom, razor sharp. We both screamed and began running back to the house, hoping to find some kind of weapon to defend ourselves with. I heard Eric yell for help. I turned to see him being lifted in the air by the creature, and then a loud crunching sound. I knew what had happened, but my mind was in flight mode, and then I ran until I couldn't anymore. I then came to the realization that I had no idea where I was. All I knew is that whatever the hell that thing was, it had killed my friend, and now I am in the woods, alone, in the dark. Every noise could be a possible sign of my demise. Whatever that thing was, it was angry, and now it was looking for me. It looked human, but there was no way in hell that it was. Why couldn't I just leave these things alone, ignore them like the others, I said to myself. As I walked quickly but quietly, I came across a sign. Thank God, I thought. Now I can hopefully find my way back to my car, or at least someone who can help me. This whole time, I had forgotten about my phone. As I reached for it, I soon found out that I was more alone than I had originally thought. Fuck, I said as I felt around in an empty pocket where my phone had once been. Now I'm seriously lost and alone, and now I have no way to call for help. I wanted a cigarette so bad to help calm me down, enough to process the situation, but was afraid the smell might attract whatever the hell that thing was. I sat next to a tree to rest, hoping daybreak would come soon. Using a flashlight would be a dead giveaway for my location. As I rested, I heard it. That same screeching and hissing sound from earlier, but this time it pierced me to the bone, almost like its scream grabbed my soul and pulled it out of my body. Crunch, crunch, crunch. It was getting closer. The sound was bouncing off the trees in the forest like a stadium effect. I couldn't tell where it was coming from, but only could tell it was getting louder and louder with each passing second. I scrambled to my feet to get ready for what could be the fight I dreaded, and likely my last moments on this earth. Then, It stopped, like it was playing games with me, just like how a cat plays with an injured mouse before finishing it off. Then everything just stopped. I couldn't even hear my heartbeat. The clouds overhead from the storm blocked out the moon as I felt the first raindrop. To make matters worse, it began to lightning and thunder. Earlier, the weather service mentioned the possibility of tornadoes as well, so now I have to worry about that too. How much worse could this get? After what seemed like an eternity, I finally decided that it was time. The storm was blowing in from the west, so I knew which way was south. If I could run south, I could find the highway and eventually my car. Thankfully, my jacket pocket was still zipped, so I still had my car keys with me. I hope it's not that far, I thought. I kept thinking about Eric and wondering what exactly that creature did and what it was planning on doing to me. I ran as fast as I could. The rain was blinding now, but it made enough noise to cover up the sound of my running like a madman, and the lightning was frequent enough I felt safe using my flashlight. I was still certain I could hear the screams from that creature trying to find me and track me down. I finally made it to the road. I began to run faster. I was home free at this point. What do I do about Eric? I thought to myself. Can't tell the police about this, they'll think I'm crazy. And I'll get sent to a mental home. My wife will probably think I lost it as well. I finally made it back to the car. The storm was getting bad. I left and went home. I tried to sleep, but I couldn't. I stayed locked in my room with the TV on for the rest of the night, and sometime around 9 a.m. the news caught my attention. One of those early rise farmers checked one of his game cameras and found a strange picture and sent it to the news. When I saw the TV reporter in the picture on the TV, I froze. There it was, that damn creature. The reporters were calling it a possible hoax. But when they gave the location, my heart just dropped. When Eric and I found this thing, it was nearly 30 miles away from where I live. This photo was taken about 15 miles from my home. Was it still tracking me? Is it coming here? I thought. Later that morning, I ended up falling asleep and waking up before I had my next shift. I thought about calling in and quitting, but because money was tight, I couldn't. I just had to figure out how to do my route now, because I know that thing, it's out there, waiting, watching for me. Once reality had set in, I was on my way to pick up these papers, hoping the drivers don't see the tears in my eyes and ask what's wrong. Was I scared to go back there, or devastated because of what happened, or both? I now find myself driving, minutes away from the turn where it all began, praying to get through this night, praying to never see this creature again. You can even look online and type in humanoid monster in Louisiana online and see the photo from the news. Still burned fresh into my mind. Now, turning down that road, I felt my insides turning to liquid and my eyes began to turn with half fear and half rage. I lit a cigarette and this time had my Glock 45 with me. Although it probably wouldn't do much good if I ran across that thing again. But it was like a security blanket. I was on my last house on that road and saw nothing. With a sigh of relief, I finished out the night and stopped at the local food mart and grabbed an energy drink and candy bar. I had the radio turned up, cruising home. And just like clockwork, when I pulled into my driveway, it started raining again. So I got wet running inside. I sat down, gave my wife a kiss, and then went to go lie down and go to sleep. And right before I was about to fall asleep, there was a noise in my attic.